Hello and welcome to this course where we will learn about this Microsoft App Center, or some might call it Azure App Center, whichever word you prefer. Again, it's a very new thing and it's quite a good thing. So what you will learn here is what it does, how it does it, how you might upload the application, where the application, your source code comes from. Does it come from some upload? Does it come from some third-party software? You'll learn those things. You'll also learn some setup intricacies. Basically, once you finish this course, you will know what this App Center is good for and how to use it. Now, with all that said, let's jump into the course. Hello, in this lecture I will show you how to set up the application initially, meaning create the sort of application record in this App Center, okay, and then also do some sort of initial setup in your Visual Studio, in your application itself, okay. So first of all, let's get to this organization and let's create the application, which I already created, by the way. So if you look here, we have a course organization, right? And then we have apps. So getting to the apps is quite easy. It's not one of those things where the registration is difficult. You just log in with your Microsoft account, and if you need an organization, you just create one. It's quite easy to do. Okay, and once you get here, you can create new application or add new app, as it says right here. So you just click on that. And the process for this is, right, the Xamarin Forms, you have 3 things, you have 2 things, or you have 1 thing, right? You might have Android, iOS, and Windows. In this case, I created them all, okay? But what you need to do is create each application separately, okay? So you don't just create one record like this for the whole set. You create them separately. So you enter the name right here on the top, see the name, and then release type, which is optional, so you can change that later. It really doesn't matter usually, of course. Sometimes it does if you need that, but you can change that later, so don't put it in, my advice. Okay, so then we have iOS, Android, Windows, macOS, tvOS, custom. So we have iOS, Android, and Windows. 3 things we have in this case. First of all, iOS. What you want to do is do Xamarin, okay, enter everything, and then click Add New App. It will be added, that's it. In the Android, again, Xamarin add, that's it. Now Windows is a bit more tricky. You see, we have Windows and then we have UWP, WPF, Windows Forms, Unity. Now there's no Xamarin, okay, so it's a bit weird in that way. But not to worry, we have UWP, okay, and that is what the Xamarin Forms provide, and that is what you need to choose, UWP. So you go with that and we are good to go. Now then, if I can open them all at the same time, okay, I will show you the next step in setting up. So the next step is to install and insert something in your actual project. Now in this case, we are on the UWP. Okay, so we can go into Xamarin Forms, okay, like that. But the point is, if I go to any one of these, I can go into Xamarin Forms again. Okay, so you got to go to Xamarin Forms. This is what we are looking at, basically, Xamarin Forms. If you are using Xamarin, you go to Xamarin, okay? And the process is sort of similar, okay? In Xamarin Forms, it's a bit complicated, a bit more complicated, right? But the idea in general is sort of the same. We have the start the SDK, second step, okay? And then before the second step, we have the first one. So for that, we need to install these 2 things, or set them up from the NuGet packages. Okay, so analytics and crashes, these 2 things I'll show you in NuGet later. Okay, and then once again we have this one, and it's the same thing. Okay, so we have these using statements, and then this app center start. So this goes on start in the same file. Now I haven't added them, so I will start, say, with this one. Okay, and I will show you how this sort of goes around and flows around, right? Let's do it in the Visual Studio now. And you see I am in the NuGet packages in Visual Studio. See, we have Microsoft App Center Analytics. Microsoft App Center crashes. So I've already pre-installed that because it takes some time. It's a nuisance, but we do have that. Now to do the rest, you go to app.xaml.cs, and mind you, we are in the course application, not in one of these specific Android, iOS, or UWP, but we are in the course application, in the main project. That's very important. In the main project, we go into this. Okay. First of all, the using statements. We can do a little space like that. Okay. We have all those different things. We don't need a duplicate. Okay, and then you see we have this method on start and override on start. So anything that you put in here launches when the application launches. Okay, now let's go back to the site, and as you can see, this is what we need to paste, and I'll explain something very important here. Something very, very important. So if I just paste it here, a little space like that, I've pasted it and it's almost good to go. But you see we have UWP plus Android plus iOS. The one for UWP is pre-inserted, right? And then we have Android, your Android app secret here. So where do you find it and how do you find it? Well, remember, we had it opened. We had it all opened right here. So see this one for UWP. Now if I go to the top, to the browser, to the tab, and we have this one, you see, this one has Android, but it doesn't have the other ones. Okay, so it's a bit tricky this way. There's no, you have to create 3 different applications, but you put everything in your one real code, right? So let's copy this piece for Android, okay? And let's go in here. Let's go in here, and we can paste it, okay? Right, like that. We paste it for Android, and what I always do, I click Ctrl+S and save it, right? There's no reason to risk it. I go back to the browser, to the third one. That would be the iOS. You see the iOS, so that's provided, and I can copy that. And get back to Visual Studio like that. Put it in for the iOS. So this is the sort of initial setup for it. Okay. Now remember, you create 3 different applications for 3 different platforms, but your code is one simple solution. I won't say it's one simple project because you have 4 projects really in one solution, but they are kind of one assembly, and you put everything, you deal with everything in the main project, Okay, so this is the initial setup, and with that we will conclude this lecture. Hello again, and excuse the interruption once again, but I do have a suggestion for you. If you want to improve your C# skills, if you want to learn something more advanced, why don't you take a look at my TCP, UDP and WebSockets course. In there, you will learn how to handle TCP, UDP and WebSockets in a very practical way. There's no drawings, no nothing like that, no theory. We're just looking at the client-side implementation and the server-side implementation of all these different sockets. It doesn't cost a lot, it won't take too much time, and you will have an advanced skill in your bag. And with that, let's get back to the course. Hello, now that we have everything sort of set up, we can begin taking some action, and that is first of all to build to build your application. Now remember, we have 3 separate applications. I call it course application in this case, but we have Android, UWP, and iOS. Okay, so first of all, I will just show you Android, the sort of initial setup on how you start building. It's all pretty much the same, right? We have to take a few steps, okay? And you build from a repository. You don't upload your code or something like that. You build from a repository. And repositories may have several different types. Now, if I go to build, okay, we have some options. Select a service. Say Azure DevOps, GitHub, Bitbucket, GitLab. Now, personally, I would definitely recommend Azure DevOps, okay? Now, you might say I'm recommending it because I have a course on Azure DevOps, but the reality is I'm using Azure DevOps. I haven't probably used these two, but I have used GitHub and I never liked it. It's just a bit of an older thing. It seems to be a bit of an outdated thing now. Azure, it's free. It's very free. You can do builds and setups and all that stuff. Lots of boards and sort of management things in there. It's just a great tool, but I don't have the code yet, so I'm going to Visual Studio. And from Visual Studio, what you do is you go to the bottom, add to source control. Okay, so you add to Git. You add to Git, that's the source control we're going to use. Okay, and then we will have to go in here somewhere. First of all, we have to wait a bit. Okay, now normally when you add it, it kind of adds quickly, but you see we had to wait a few seconds. And this is more of a Xamarin thing. Xamarin, you have to wait for many things, right? But once that's done, once everything is prepared, you see now we have 2 and 0. So that's good. We can go to Azure DevOps, publish to Azure DevOps, publish Git repo, like that. Okay. And it's loading a bit. Okay. Now I have several organizations. Okay, you can publish to whichever you want to, but usually when you register with Visual Studio or you just register to those Microsoft things, you'll have your sort of personal account, and this is where I'm going to go in this case. Okay, it's going to call the repository course application. Okay, but you can go into advanced. Okay, you see, you go into advanced and you can create the project and then add it, but I won't get into that. This is more of an Azure thing, that is the DevOps thing, not what we're doing here, which is the App Center. App Center is a sort of a different entity. It simply takes from the Azure DevOps. I'm clicking Publish Repository, and it should be published in a few seconds, hopefully, right? See, it gives a little push to the whole thing, and I just want to highlight a bit. You see, it's taking quite a bit of time. This is mostly because we have quite a lot of stuff. We have 3 projects with Xamarin. We have lots of different things going on in Xamarin. So it's usually going to take a bit longer with Xamarin than the, say, API or WPF applications. It is just the way it is. Now let's go to this one. Okay, let's go to Azure DevOps. See, connecting. Now I'm all connected, and it should work perfectly, right? This is other entities. Okay, what we need here is the course application. Okay, this is the one. Okay, we have course application. We go in. We need to select a repository. Now, mind you, this is first of all a project, and then a project can contain many repositories. So this is one important thing to actually remember. And you see, we have branches now. You can see everything. Last build. We can modify. We can go into modifications. And here this is where the interesting part begins. Okay, we have several options, and I'm going to explain some of them, although it is quite clear, as you can see. We have configuration. So it's just like Visual Studio, either debug or release. Now for testing we want debug, okay, and then we have the SDK version. Let's do the latest stable. Obviously if you're working with some legacy thing, perhaps you would choose a different one. That's quite clear, right? Then we have scripts. We don't have any, so that's fine, right? And then we have build frequency. Now this is an important step. You really have to decide, do you really want to have it built on every push? I mean, you'll have all these notifications, all these builds, and probably maybe unsuccessful builds if you don't if you publish something, or rather if you push something that's not complete, it will fail, obviously. So I would normally just go with manually choose when to run builds. It's just a better option, a lot clearer when to actually build. Now we have a build Android app bundle. Okay, we won't get into that. So that's off. Automatically increment version code. Now this one might be useful, but you really have to, again, decide on these versions, whether you want to increment or not. Okay, now I will choose on, okay, and then you have a format. You either have the ID or timestamp. Doesn't really matter. Let's go with ID. Okay, so it will be, you see, next is 1. So next one after that will be 2. Then we have the environment variables. Okay, the environment variables. So you might be familiar with environment variables, perhaps more specifically in, say, API development, website development. Those are the places where I would believe environment variables are more common or perhaps more known of. Okay, so we won't do any of that. Okay. Now, builds must be signed on to run on devices. This is very important. So any application, WPF, UWP, Android, iOS, Xamarin, it doesn't matter. It has to be signed. Okay, it has to be signed. Now, the signing basically contains some data about the application, ownership, and that stuff. So we would have to turn it on. Okay, we have to turn it on, and then you see we have some more options. Now I will explain this key store thing in one of the next lectures. Okay, we won't actually go through with this right now. I will explain it to you in a bit more detail because this is very, very important. If you want to publish something, you have to have one of these signatures. Okay, now we have this distribute build, so we don't need that right now. And then we have build status badge. This is kind of a self-explanatory thing if you read about it, but again, I won't get into that. I just want to show you in this lecture, I just want to show you a few simple things. Okay, how we begin the build. And also, you can see we went through this sort of checklist. So we actually went beyond the build. Okay, we went beyond the build. It's not just build, it's environment, it's test, and it's distributed. We do not want to get into that as of yet. Okay, now I can turn that off. Okay, and I can save and build. So let's just take a look at how the building works, which is probably the easiest part of these things. It's not really that difficult, but you see, I started the build process and now it's building. You see, now it's waiting. Okay, so let's wait for the next step. There's nothing to wait for really. Okay, the building has started, and you see you have time running. It doesn't say how long it will take, but basically lots of different stuff going on right here. It says running, and you can actually leave this page. You can come back to it later. It will all be there, and of course you can cancel it right here if something, if you remember something. Okay. Let's see, it's running, so let's wait for it to finish. Now then, the build has finished, and it was quite quick. It's only 1 minute and 35 seconds. You see, we have a green check mark, which means it was successful. But on the other hand, it was quite useless at this point, because the idea is probably to for it not just to build, because it's quite pointless. I mean, we know that it works, but we can really do that on the Visual Studio. There's no reason to run it like that in here. What we want to really achieve is the tests. Okay, so it builds, then it runs the tests, and then it distributes. And with all that said, we will conclude this lecture. Hello, excuse the interruption, but I have a suggestion for you. If you are still struggling with Xamarin, with how to work with it, with how to set up camera, or how to access files, or how to just do plain simple XAML setup, I suggest taking a look at my Xamarin course, Xamarin Forms course, where we go after simply UWP and Android. You won't need to set up an iOS for iOS specific stuff. We're just looking at Android and UWP parts of the Xamarin Forms. It goes from basics to something a bit more advanced, but it's not too complicated, it's not too complex, it will not take too much time, and you will get a proper start with that Xamarin Forms development. And with that, back to the course. Hello, in this lecture I will show you how the building process begins for iOS specifically. If you have seen the Android previously, there's not going to be too much of a difference, but let's take a look, just a quick look. Go to, again, Azure DevOps. Okay, then we need to choose our library. Not the library, rather the repository, right? In this case, it's kind of a library in a way, but it's not. Okay, so we have a branch, the building, and it has begun. Okay, it has begun, and hasn't exactly begun. We just have created it, and we can again take a look at a few things. So in this case, you see we have the Xamarin iOS version, latest stable. Again, if you need legacy, you go to somewhere in here below that. Then either debug or release. Okay, then the project you choose. Okay, and then we have Xcode version as well. So we have 3 options here, only 3 options for the Xcode. Normally you obviously want to work with the latest one unless there's a reason not to. Okay, and then we have device build or simulator build. Okay, so let's deal with the simulator. Okay, it will be quicker. It will be a lot quicker, and I'll tell you probably later the difference about them. There's no real difference in testing. Okay, so let's do automatically increment the number, build ID, that's fine, the same thing. Now, the sign, the signatures, you see, this is different. Now, this is different for the Android and the iOS. It is a different thing. In Android, you only have one thing to upload. Here you have a few more. Okay, so we won't do that right now. Okay, we won't do that right now. And you see, you can set up, and then we have this advanced thing. So it's pretty much the same. You have a few differences: device build, simulator build, and then the Xcode version, right? So this is iOS specific really. And again, we won't go through further of these steps. Test we will cover separately, and distribution as well. So these are 2 different things. When you do this build setup, you should just do the build stuff. You shouldn't go into any of that other stuff. And I click save and build, and now it will save, and indeed it will build. So let's skip that and see if it builds. So the build, as you can see, was successful. We have a green check mark, that's great. And we have some warnings as well. Right here you see some of that stuff, doesn't really matter here. Okay, and we get the full output, just like we have for the Android, or just like you would have for any kind of different application, whatever it may be, API or something like that. In Azure DevOps, that would probably be, but we do get those outputs, and that's all fine, and everything was built, and that's great. It did, however, take a bit longer than the Android, but it's not a nuisance kind of a time amount, so it's all great and good. And with all that said, we will conclude this lecture. Hello, in this lecture I will show you the initial setup, the initial build of a UWP, the Windows version of this Xamarin application. Okay, so let's begin and let's jump into the Azure DevOps. Now, I do presume you have seen already the Android, the iOS, or at least one of them, but if you haven't, you only notice, or I'll tell you about a few little differences. So we go again to the course application, the Azure DevOps repository. Okay, and we jumped into that. We choose the actual repository. First we choose the project and then the repository, because the project can contain several repositories. That's important to remember if you work with Azure DevOps. Okay, so we have this build configuration. We need to configure it, right? Okay, so now for the Windows, for the UWP, we need to select platforms. Okay, we had to select a version for the iOS. For Android it was different, but for this we can choose just all of them. That's right. Nothing will go away. Okay, and build this branch on every push. Manually choose when to run builds. Now, I've covered this before. I personally prefer manually choose, okay, because I don't really need it to build on every push. There's no point in that. We can automatically increment for sure. Okay, this one, by the way, doesn't let you choose how it's incremented. It just kind of increments in its own way. Okay, then the environment variables, and then the signed builds. Okay, so as you can see, it's one PFX certificate. I would say for the Windows it's the easiest one to sign, but I will cover these certificates, these signature signing things later as a sort of separate specific specified experience, because this is very important and it is quite difficult to do. So that is something that's useful for you to watch and learn. This is quite tricky. Okay, so we won't be signing initially, and we have these distribute builds. Okay, release your app to groups or to store. If we click on, we need to select the destination and all that stuff, or to store rather. Okay, and you need to connect to stores. I will explain all that later. We don't need that right now. So I can click save and build. Okay, and it will start building, and we will skip that once again, and you will see the result. So the build has finished, and as usual it was successful indeed, but much to my surprise it took quite a bit longer than the other options. So this was 7 minutes 57 seconds. The other one was 2 minutes or so. So it is kind of a stranger thing, okay? But you may also notice it is signed. We didn't go through that, but it was signed anyway. So again, I will explain the signatures later, but with all that said, we will conclude this lecture. Hello again. Excuse the interruption, but if you are interested in the App Center, you will probably also need to know how to use Azure DevOps. You will need it. They go along side by side together, right? And so with that, I would like to recommend my Azure DevOps course, where we get from sort of basic setup to something a bit more advanced, such as setting up all those different management structures and what different things mean, and how to sort of get started with everything, get everything set up. Also, I would like to recommend my course on publishing, deploying a .NET Core API, or .NET 5 API rather, right? Through the Azure DevOps. It's a similar thing to what we have here with the App Center, but that will be via the Azure DevOps. So it will be for you a sort of full experience with Azure publishing, deployment, and all that stuff. So do take a look at that, and back to the course. Hello, in this lecture I will show you just the basic setup of a test run, okay, and we have it right here. So this is again Android application. We did the build, okay, now we can do some test runs, but this is just a basic setup. And what you do, you go to start testing your app, click that, and you need to choose the device basically. Okay, and we have some good options here. Let's go for Huawei, why not? Perhaps a more known one in my opinion. And then let's go to select one device. Okay, you can select several actually, but we'll go with one for now. Okay, and then you have these different test frameworks. Okay, so whichever test framework you prefer to use, you choose that one. We will go with Xamarin.UI test. Okay, we'll go with this one. Then you need to select the system language, which is important if your application is made for, say, French language. You need to choose French. If it's made for German, you choose German. That is very, very important. Otherwise, you will have several problems later. Now we have test series. So this is basically the branch from which we build, and we do the master. Okay, and then let's go next. Okay, next. And now we have some, basically, as it says here, prerequisites, okay? And now we need to install a few things. See? Command line interface. You need to install that for this particular testing system. Okay, you need to install that and that and that, and then running tests. Okay, let's go to the bottom a bit. Okay, and we have some of these options displayed. Now I'll click done, okay, and then later obviously we'll get to that whole thing of setting it up, actually setting it up, because as you saw there is some stuff to install, and that is what we will do. Now with that said, we will conclude this lecture. Hello again, and excuse the interruption once again, but I do have a suggestion for you. If you want to improve your C# skills, if you want to learn something more advanced, why don't you take a look at my TCP, UDP and WebSockets course. In there, you will learn how to handle TCP, UDP and WebSockets in a very practical way. There's no drawings, no nothing like that, no theory. We're just looking at the client-side implementation and the server-side implementation of all these different sockets. It doesn't cost a lot, it won't take too much time, and you will have an advanced skill in your bag. And with that, let's get back to the course. Hello, in this lecture we will take a quick look at the sort of initial setup of the test in the iOS version of this application. Okay, so again it's pretty much the same thing as the Android, as the UWP, but let's start testing your app or my app or our app. Okay, and it loads the devices, and as you can see you can choose from several of them. You can choose one or a few of them. It really doesn't matter, and it's the same thing as the Android. Now, I don't use these devices, so I'm just gonna pick, say, 11 because it's the highest number. It really doesn't matter. Okay, and let's go to select one device. And then again, you have all these different test options. So they are a bit different, obviously, but we'll go with Xamarin.UI test. Okay, because we went with that on the Android, and it will be sort of a similar experience, right? We always hope for a similar experience with these Android applications. That does not always happen, but we hope for that and we try to get there, because that's really the point of Xamarin, right? And then we click next, and again we have some bit of setup to do, right? It's actually the same thing as we will have to do for the Android. Okay, so click done, and it's set up. Okay, so we have these. We don't have the runs. Okay, we have just the initial setup. Okay, just the initial setup. We have these series, test series master, the same thing we have for Android. And with all that said, we will conclude this lecture. Hello again. Excuse the interruption, but if you are interested in the App Center, you will probably also need to know how to use Azure DevOps. You will need it. They go along side by side together, right? And so with that, I would like to recommend my Azure DevOps course, where we get from sort of basic setup to something a bit more advanced, such as setting up all those different management structures and what different things mean and how to sort of get started with everything, get everything set up. Also, I would like to recommend my course on publishing, deploying a .NET Core API, or .NET 5 API rather, right? Through the Azure DevOps. It's a similar thing to what we have here with the App Center, but that will be via the Azure DevOps. So it will be for you a sort of full experience with Azure publishing, deployment, and all that stuff. So do take a look at that, and back to the course. Hello, in this lecture we will be looking at installing and preparing this whole test run thing with the App Center CLI. As you can see right here, we have that thing, and then we have the installation. Okay, so you need to have first of all that Node.js thing, right? Once you download that, it's a sort of simple installation. You will get to your console window, okay, and you'll run this npm install App Center. So the code or the command line rather copied from here. Okay, so you run that. Now once you do that, you also need to sort of log in to the whole thing. Okay, and to do that you write App Center login. Okay, and then you will be asked if you want to enable telemetry. Okay, so you either write Y or N, and then you have visit App Center MS CLI login, AMSI, and enter code. Now then, I restarted this console, and it's requiring the access code again, so we're going to paste it like that. Okay, enter, and it's getting the info, and now it is connected. Okay, so it is connected now. Right, the next step of course is to get it back maybe to this test run description. Okay, and as you can see, the logging in step wasn't really part of this. It says install, and then you have running tests. Okay, so we can actually try to run this little guy right here. Just to copy it, I'll show you what happens and then what doesn't happen. We paste that right here like that. We can run it, and as you can see, we have run UI test, this devices, app path, see, master, build directory, and as you can see, we are missing a few things. Okay, we are missing sort of proper build directory here, and we do get some kind of an error. It says cannot find testcloud.exe, which is required to prepare UI tests. Now there are some tricky bits here, but again, once you have it connected like that, okay, once you have it connected like that, it becomes more of a general sort of unit test thing. It doesn't connect with that App Center as much anymore. So it's not particularly an App Center thing, but it is more of a unit test thing at that point. Okay, but I will close that, and we'll continue from some other step later. Hello, in this lecture we will take a look at a few things that you will need to do before actually publishing your Android application in the Android store. Okay, so you need to set up a few things, and some of that can be very tricky to find or to understand how to actually achieve it. Okay, so first of all, let's see where you would find everything. Okay, and to do that you need to go to the Android part of your application, right click on it, and then go to properties. Now once you're in the properties, you need to go to Android manifest. Okay, so that's the first thing you need to do. Go to Android manifest. Then we have application name. Okay, and then you have package name. Now you probably want to change the application name. It will be perhaps easier to understand, make something a bit more friendly. Okay, that is not crucial, as well as the package name. Package name should be something relatively simple, because you have to keep the package name always the same. If you change something later, it will be very troublesome. So you keep it always the same, but this default name I think is quite fine. Users won't see it anyway, so it really doesn't matter too much. Okay, now then, we have the icon. We'll get back to that a bit later. But then we have version number, okay, and version name. And we have install location, prefer internal. That's probably an obvious choice, okay. And then you have minimum Android version, okay. You do have to look at these things, especially if you're accessing some features of that phone, of that device. So do be careful about this. I can't really give you any real specific details, because that will depend heavily on your specific tasks, on what your program will try to achieve. Okay, so we have that minimum Android version and the target version. Now target version would probably be the highest one currently. That would be the logical thing to do. Okay, and then with that we have required permissions. Okay, required permissions. Now you do set up those things kind of separately depending on the permissions. You do need to include some code as well to kind of initiate them, ask users for permission on the runtime and things like that. But this is where you would find them, and again, do be careful about them. If they are not allowed, it will not work. But usually you do that while it's developing. You don't need to really get back here separately. You just do it once you implement it right away. Okay, and we can't go any deeper. There's nowhere else to go here for now. Okay, so everything else would be set up in the Android store. But we do need to have application icon. Okay, that's kind of important. Okay, this is launcher foreground, so this is when it's launching, that image will be displayed. Okay, and then we have this map icon. So you have to choose them. You have to choose them somewhere in here, say this one. But where do you find them? Now you find them in the resources. Right here in the resources folder. Okay, you have drawable, layout, and all these different icons. So you see, you have an icon like that, HDPI. So you basically, what you want to do, you want to keep your own image with the same name. So you want to rename your image to icon, and then to launch a foreground, and then you replace all these values. Okay, you replace all of them, and you should be able to then pick them up from here. You shouldn't change the name, because that can become quite troublesome, and there is no need to do that. Finally, you need to go to Android package signing. You need to sign your package. Okay, and you check this, okay, and you provide your key store details. So the actual signature will generate in the Android store, okay, in the Play Store, and you'll provide your details and it will be used to sign those packages. This is again quite important. The same thing as the version name. They do have to always match, and once you have a new package, you need to increase the version so that it's different version, otherwise it won't work. These things are rather tricky, so do be very careful. Now, once you develop any one of these applications, that's really not the end of your job. You need to still do some of these tricky bits, and if you do them right away, that will be fine. If you do not do them right away, it will become quite troublesome to change them because something won't match and it will be difficult to change that value. So again, do be very careful, and with all that said, we will conclude this lecture. Hello, excuse the interruption, but I have a suggestion for you. If you are still struggling with Xamarin, with how to work with it, with how to set up camera, or how to access files, or how to just do plain simple XAML setup, I suggest taking a look at my Xamarin course, Xamarin Forms course, where we go after simply UWP and Android. You won't need to set up an iOS for iOS specific stuff. We're just looking at Android and UWP parts of the Xamarin Forms. It goes from basics to something a bit more advanced, but it's not too complicated, it's not too complex, it will not take too much time, and you will get a proper start with that Xamarin Forms development. And with that, back to the course. Hello, in this lecture we will take a look at setting up the iOS part of this whole application for publishing, okay? And first of all, once again, what you want to do is go to the course application, our sample application, and the iOS part. Then right click on it and go to properties. Once you go to properties, you need to get to the iOS manifest, okay? And from there, you can open up this, the whole manifest thing, or you can simply go to info.plist, okay? You can open that, and if I click that, we get into this info.plist, so whichever way you prefer, okay? And then we can set the visual assets, okay? And once again, some application stuff, your application name, which is very important, just like the Android, and of course the build, the version. Those things are definitely quite important. When you generate these packages, so they do need to make sense. You should never just put in some random number. You should keep some kind of a track on these, or at least attempt to do that. Okay, and then we have capabilities. Okay, we have Game Center, Maps integration if you need that, and then some background modes. And again, these things you do set up during the development. Usually it's not something you do when you prepare for publishing. Okay, and then we have advanced, and again, this is the kind of thing that you would set up during the development. Now, in terms of the iOS application, there's really not too much going on in this kind of a setup. UWP would probably be the most tricky there, perhaps, or at least will have the most things to set up. Android is, of course, quite tricky as well. Some issues may arise from there. Okay, but now if we get back to properties, you also need to do signing right here. But with the iOS, you can have it automatic. Then you add the account. That will be the Apple ID. Okay, so you enter Apple ID, password, and it should fill all those things in, and it will basically take care of the signing for you. Okay, so this is how you go about setting up the iOS. As you can see, it's quite simple and quite straightforward, not a lot of stuff to do. And with all that said, we will conclude this lecture. Hello again. Excuse the interruption, but if you are interested in the App Center, you will probably also need to know how to use Azure DevOps. You will need it. They go along side by side together, right? And so with that, I would like to recommend my Azure DevOps course, where we get from sort of basic setup to something a bit more advanced, such as setting up all those different management structures and what different things mean and how to sort of get started with everything, get everything set up. Also, I would like to recommend my course on publishing, deploying a .NET Core API or .NET 5 API rather, right? Through the Azure DevOps. It's a similar thing to what we have here with the App Center, but that will be via the Azure DevOps. So it will be for you a sort of full experience with Azure publishing, deployment, and all that stuff. So do take a look at that, and back to the course. Hello, in this lecture we will take a look at how you would set up your UWP, part of the whole application for publishing. Okay, and first of all, once again, just like we do with Android and iOS, you need to go to properties right here, and once you get to properties, where you get into that whole setup thing, you need to click on package manifest. Okay, package manifest, and it gets you to a very nice sort of setup page. And then you have display name, which is important to change. Obviously, you don't want to have some kind of a nonsense name like this, course application UWP. Okay, we have default language, which can be also quite important if you're not doing it in English. You should do the appropriate language and region for what you are doing. You can enter a description as well. Okay, and then you can indicate these preferences, which I would definitely do. Okay, it really depends on the design, but usually you don't design UWP application to fit everything. Okay, but again, since this is Xamarin application, you may be able to make it fit properly on any kind of a screen, and that is very likely what you will be doing, so you might not need to specify any of these preferences. Okay, and then we have lock screen notifications. We can select whether we do text and badge or badge. Okay, so quite a few things here, quite a few things. And you have also this URI template. Okay, now this is basically the way you can redirect to the application from some kind of a click from somewhere. But we won't get into that. This is more of a specific UWP development thing, right? And then we have visual assets. Okay, so this is quite a bit of stuff to do actually. The good thing, however, the good thing about UWP, it almost always works. There are really no real sort of issues here. Okay, and you can actually generate the asset. So what you would do, you would put in the source. Okay, you would put in your main sort of an image, as you can see, suggested size 400 by 400, and it would basically generate every other image as well from that one image. Now, of course, it may not generate that well from square to wide and things like that, so you might need to change them, readjust them, add some more specific images in more specific places. The icon probably won't be generated as well as you might like it, but it will take care of you for most of it. Okay, most of it will be fine. Some of them you will need to change, but it will save you quite a bit of time when you use this load generator, asset generator as it's called. Okay, and then you can also do all these different scales. So you have you see you have these scales, so you can select basically what you want and what you don't want. Say you don't want to generate wide, so you just uncheck that and you do that manually. If you do, you check it and you're good to go basically. Okay, so we have all these selections, and again, basically this is just for the beautiful stuff, all these logos, as you can see, splash screen as well. So all these different things, and you can have the name, you can put in the name if you need that. You can also set up the tiles. Okay, this is more of a perhaps an old-fashioned thing. And initially, when this UWP came to be, you had Windows smartphones that used these tiles, and then you had that Metro stuff. All those things use tiles. Now it's not really that hot of a thing, those tiles, so maybe don't need to work on it too much, but it's good to have it properly set up. Okay, so we have that, and then we have capabilities. This is, once again, you do this during the development. You don't really get back to it after you've done everything, because you do need those permissions to do some certain things. Right, and then we have declarations, we won't get into that, content URIs, and then packaging we have as well. Now packaging, obviously, you would want to set up your proper versions, that's very important, and make something reasonable, have something that makes sense. Okay, now if we get back to properties, okay, we can actually get to signing, okay, and you can sign the assembly. You can sign the assembly, and you can create new key, okay, new key file, and go from there. But this is basically where you would do all that signing, put your details in, and do all that stuff. Now, with all that said, we will conclude this lecture.